As a kid, I could get along with and talk to different people from various friend groups. It just really didn't matter to me. I mean, I liked people, I liked talking to people. If you were my friend, great. If not, oh well, I had these other friends and I thought I made friends with a lot of different people. But come to find, I probably wasn't really close to them because sometimes they would say and do really crappy things to my face. And I was really stupid because I look at it and I go, what? What are you saying? I just didn't get it. I didn't get that they were being really jerks to me, and I didn't get it that they didn't like me. Okay, I thought they did because, they acted like it. So I said, okay, well, I guess that's I guess that's the way that goes. But of course, I had these other friends too. And then I also look back, decades later on everything. And I look back and I say, I did do and say some pretty crappy things to people who were my friends. And again, really, really sorry. I'm really apologize. But then there was this one other type of friend that I have that we didn't go to school together, but we had like the shared life experiences with. And we've known each other for over 60 years, grew up across the street from each other, spent all day long with each other, did everything together, cried together, laughed together, did nutty things together, still do nutty things together, still in communication, had little arguments now and then because we're really not super alike, but we love each other unconditionally. It's a valuable friendship that is closer than family. Like we're part of each other. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, especially with regards to like George Harrison and his view, looking back on friendship and the Beatles, etc. I think that George, in the end, really valued friendship more than like fame or anything like that. And I think a lot of people might not give him credit for that. They think that he was grumpy or whatever, and maybe he was, but maybe he had a reason to be grumpy. Maybe, his friends didn't treat him right or whatever, or who knows? I wasn't there. I'm not analyzing him. All I'm doing is looking back and because I'm listening to George talking as he's looking back and saying, man, we were tight. And that's what the Beatles had. The Beatles had that shared life experience that made them tight, just like me and my friend Patty. So like something very tight. And there was four of them. They had that shared experience, basically kind of went through hell together, went through a war together. They endured Beatlemania together. That friendship, that bond, they're so very different, but so alike. They had something there that no one's ever going to duplicate, but it's what held them together that got them up here. And it sustained them on the climb to the top. But then once they got there, it's like things began to change. And the friendship probably began to be taken for granted. And it probably was. That's what happens when you're young, when you're a kid. You take stuff for granted. That is exactly what happens. You're a young man, you're building your life, you take stuff for granted, you push things aside, you're not so nice, you're not so great, you do crappy things, you say crappy things. That's just how it is, and that's how it was. So this is what happened. Friendships is complicated. But that foundation, that solid core never went away. And that's what enabled them always to kind of come back no matter what. They were always able to kind of get back together, and they really didn't get back together, but they always were able to communicate and love each other and understand each other and have each other's back in the end. And George, looking back on that friendship, again, it just kind of is very, it kind of gets me right in the gut, right in the heart when he looks back and says, man, we were tight. Almost like he'd lost something. Because they did lose something. They lost, that time, because that's what happens. You just take things for granted. Again, your kids. And they had that tightness, they had that closeness, and they didn't lose it, but that tightness where they were in each other's pocket, just like me and my BFF, where we just spent all that time together. Every day, just doing nothing together. Of course, the Beatles were doing something together, but it's those experiences and all those little shared memories. You're part of each other's DNA. And that is what makes that friendship so special. That's what helps them to overcome anything. They can overcome their egos. They can overcome hurts. They look back and they say, yeah, we were tight. That's what this was about. It was that tightness. It was this closeness. This is who we were. And they can all agree on that. Like, I love those guys. They all said that. Like John said it. I might say this today, but I still love those guys, and Paul, like, we were so tight. Paul definitely says a lot of nice things these days about how tight they were. And Ringo, even back then, I don't think Ringo ever really had a bad thing to say about the Beatles, really. I don't think he did. He always was able to express himself, how much he loved everybody. And that's why we love Ringo. And George, I feel, probably experienced a hurt that the others didn't. Because when you look at George, I feel that George was more that guy who prioritized the friendship, who probably felt naively, maybe just like me, like, oh, it's the friends. I thought we were friends. So there's an element of that, in my opinion, with George's hurt. With George maybe sounding grumpy sometimes, George sometimes, not really getting along or being a little bit pessimistic and just being, again, maybe sounding a little bit immature, experiencing the hurt of like a lost friendship. My God. Okay. And that's what John was saying. It's like John was saying in that teapot conversation, okay, that mic'd conversation that we heard, we didn't give him any bandages. They didn't give George any bandages. They just said, okay, he's just going to deal with it. And again, they're guys. That's just what happens. So I'm sure that unbandaged wound stayed with George a long time. I feel like he probably could have held grudges. I feel like they all held grudges against each other. I'm sorry. They were guys. They had egos. They all held grudges. They were all kind of stinky to each other, but they all cared. They all got in touch with each other. They were able to communicate, even though they were stinky to each other. We don't know what all went on behind the scenes, but we know that they had to communicate with each other because of that. Because again, I know with my friend, we would still fight or whatever. It doesn't matter. Anything else, it doesn't matter. We're going to communicate. Nothing else matters. And again, the older you get, that's why George, looking back on everything, it just breaks my heart when he would look back and say, we were tight. And he says, I miss those guys, almost like maybe he's just, waking up because maybe he blocked everything out and was waking up to the fact, man, I really miss those guys. And there's this other interview that really gets me, that really drove everything home, that made me kind of open my eyes to how important the friendship was to George, and that he might still be saying, I'm never going to do that again, was when George was talking about forming the Traveling Wilburys and how he said, I wanted to make sure that the friendships always stayed intact. And that kind of says into his mind that the friendships really didn't stay intact with the Beatles. So his deal was the friendships first. He wanted the closeness. He wanted the tightness. This is what was important to George. So no matter what you might think of George, and I love George, I love them all equally. And I can understand where George is coming from here. And it's man, I'm looking back, we lost this, I thought this, and it wasn't like this, and they all were thinking different things. But just from George's point of view, from what he learned was the friendships are important. And of course, they all feel that way, and they all act on it differently. But George looking back and all of that and wanting to make sure they were all tight and, and I know he wanted Paul to show up for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing. I mean, that would have been great. George says, hey, Paul missed out on that. He should have shown up because it's the friendship that's important. And I don't blame Paul. Paul didn't want to show up. He didn't have to show up. Who cares? It's done. It's in the past. But again, They all move beyond that. George looking back on Anthology, George showing up for Anthology. Maybe George didn't want to show up for Anthology. They all have their crap that they're dealing with and the messy friendship. But that bond is always there. You can see it when they're sitting there together. They just all lock in. That never went away. And I also heard this one guy this one time. We all know that George spent his last days at Paul's house in LA. We all know that. And I heard this one commenter say one time, George must have been pissed off that he had to stay in Paul's house to die. What the fuck is that? What kind of a comment is that? I'm hoping that they were joking when they said that, because knowing and understanding that George kind of comes from the place of like friendships first. Yeah, I can be a jerk sometimes and I'm going to joke around and I'm going to give you a hard time, but I celebrate and love you and I love the friendship. And no matter what, the friend is here. And I'm sure that Paul and Ringo are exactly the same way. And so they might be different, but they're alike in that way. Like, hey, I'm here for you. And just like what did George say to Ringo at the end? Like, yeah, hey, you want me to come with you? Oh my God. Yeah, you want me to come with you? That's what I'm saying. It's like they were there for each other, like no matter what. And George joking at the end about that. Like, I'm here for you. And even Paul admitting that, Paul does have an ego, and him and Yoko, there's some friction there, obviously, with that. And George giving Paul the guidance to, hey man, just get over it. You don't want that, hanging over you. So who knows? I'm not sure when George gave Paul that advice to just let go of whatever was there between them, whatever the friction was. You got to let it go. It's like not important. You don't want that hanging over you. So who knows? Maybe George had let go of some stuff too. Maybe George had learned a lesson. No, I'm not going to let this stuff hang over me. I'm just going to move on. It's not important. We're all learning those lessons all the time. It's not important. What is important and what's not important. And I think with George, at the end, that the friendship was important. And you can picture him and Paul just kind of holding hands there. It was that friendship at the end that was important. And that's what, and that's what George would always say. It's like, it's all love and like love one another. And so again, I just don't understand people who don't get that side of George. And we're all very different. George is not just one thing. Paul is not just one thing. Ringo, not one thing. And John, definitely not just one thing. They are all very different, messy people who are friends, who had this friendship, who had this incredible, unique experience where they bonded and together and became one and became basically invincible when they were together. And so that's why they always somehow something always kind of keeps them coming back together somehow, whether they like it or not. Okay, whether they like it or not. And what did George always kind of say? Yeah, I'm probably always going to be known as a Beatle. Now, they all kind of say that. And I bet you anything, they all probably love it. We're fine with it. We're fine. So hang on to those friendships. And like George says, love one another. Until next time, peace.